July 12, 1982. Basel, Switzerland. The conference room sits 3 floors beneath the bank for International Settlements headquarters. No windows. The air tastes recycled, metallic. Fluorescent lights hum overhead, casting everything in surgical white. 23 economists from 17 nations occupy leather chairs around an oval table made of Danish teak. They've been here for 6 hours. On the table, a single page of numbers. The page concerns Mexico, specifically Mexico's announcement, delivered 48 hours earlier through encrypted telex, that it cannot service its debt obligations. The number at the bottom of the page is $80 billion. For context, Mexico's entire GDP hovers around $250 billion. The country has confessed it cannot pay, but that's not why the room is silent. Dr. Wilhelm Hoffmann, chief economist for the Bundesbank, stares at the second column of figures. His coffee has gone cold. He hasn't touched it in 90 minutes. Beside him, James Kershaw from the Bank of England traces the same column with a mechanical pencil, checking the arithmetic for the 4th time. Across the table, Marie Fontaine of the Banque de France removes her reading glasses and pinches the bridge of her nose. The numbers make no sense, not because they're wrong, because they're consistent. Hoffmann speaks first, voice careful. The creditor structure. Anyone else seeing this? Kershaw nods slowly. Same institutions, same terms, same everything. Fontaine replaces her glasses. I've been analyzing sovereign debt for 16 years. I've never seen coordination like this. The page shows Mexico's creditors. Not all of them. That would require a phone book, but the major holders. The pattern is unmistakable. The debts aren't owed to America. Not really. Not to Germany. Not to Britain. Not to the oil states or Japan or any single sovereign entity. The debts are owed upward. To the International Monetary Fund. To the World Bank. To the Bank for International Settlements itself. To syndicates of commercial banks operating under Basel regulatory frameworks. To central bank swap facilities and emergency lending windows. To an architecture of institutions that, when mapped on paper, form a pyramid with no visible peak. Hoffmann stands, walks to the far wall, where a secretary has pinned a larger schematic. His finger traces the flow of capital backward through time. Mexico borrowed from American commercial banks. Those banks borrowed from the Federal Reserve discount window. The Federal Reserve coordinated with the IMF. The IMF's largest shareholder is the United States Treasury. But the Treasury's monetary policy is managed by the Federal Reserve. The loop closes. It's circular, Hoffmann says quietly. The whole system. It references itself. Kershaw joins him at the wall. Not just Mexico. Look at Brazil, Argentina, the Philippines. He taps each country in sequence. Same creditor hierarchy, same institutional chain, same terms, just different numbers. A younger economist, Thomas Wade from the U.S. Treasury, speaks up, defensive. That's because we standardized lending practices after the oil shocks. It's coordination, not conspiracy. I didn't say conspiracy, Hoffmann replies, not turning around. I said circular, self-referential. The system lends to itself, through nations, back to itself. Fontaine pulls out another document from her briefcase. I brought the 1970s debt profiles. Poland, Turkey, Zaire, different continents, different governments, communist, capitalist, military dictatorships. Guess what? Same lenders, Kershaw finishes. Same lenders, she confirms. The room absorbs this. Someone coughs. Papers rustle. Outside, beyond 3 floors of reinforced concrete, Basel goes about its Monday evening. Trams chime. The Rhine flows. The medieval cathedral bells mark 7 o'clock. Down here, a different kind of bell is ringing. Wade tries again. So, what are you suggesting? That there's some, shadow government, secret cabal? No. Hoffmann returns to his seat, suddenly exhausted. I'm suggesting we've been categorizing this wrong for decades. We've been studying national debts, bilateral agreements, sovereign lending. We thought we were watching countries lend to other countries. He places both palms flat on the table. We were watching a machine, a single integrated system, and every country, every single country, is a client of that system, not a partner in it. The silence that follows is different from the one before. This silence has weight, gravity, the kind that makes you aware of your own breathing. Marie Fontaine opens her leather portfolio and pulls out a declassified Fed document from 1975. After the first oil shock, there was a meeting. Very quiet. Central bank governors from the G10, plus Brazil and Mexico. The topic was recycling petrodollars. Does anyone remember what that actually meant? Wade shifts uncomfortably. He remembers. It meant, Fontaine continues, taking the surplus dollars oil exporters earned and recycling them back into the developing world as loans. Through commercial banks, yes, but coordinated by central banks and the IMF. We called it recycling. What it actually was engineered debt distribution. She lets the phrase hang. We created the debtors, she says, deliberately, to absorb the surplus and maintain the dollar's global circulation. And now we're surprised the debtors can't pay. Hoffman leans forward. How many others? I'm sorry? How many other countries are structured like Mexico? Same creditors, same terms, same trap? Fontaine doesn't need to check her notes. 42, at least. The number lands like a gavel. Kershaw stands abruptly, chair scraping. He walks to the corner of the room where a telex machine sits dormant. We need to inform... He stops. Who do we inform? The central banks already know. The IMF structures the loans. The BIS hosts these meetings. Inform our governments, Wade suggests. Our governments, Hoffman says, with something between a laugh and a sigh, are part of the client base. You think the U.S. Treasury operates independently of the Federal Reserve? You think Parliament controls the Bank of England? These are legal fictions, comforting stories we tell ourselves. Wade's face reddens. That's absurd. Governments set policy. Governments set fiscal policy, Fontaine interrupts, not unkindly. Central banks set monetary policy. And central banks don't answer to governments. Not really. They coordinate. They advise. They maintain independence. What does that independence mean, Mr. Wade? Independent from whom? Wade has no answer. The door opens. A BIS official, grey suit, forgettable face, enters with a tray of fresh coffee. He places it on the sideboard, nods politely, and exits. The lock clicks softly behind him. Hoffman watches the door for a long moment. This building, he says, is sovereign territory. Did you know that? The BIS compound enjoys legal immunity in Switzerland, cannot be raided, cannot be audited by Swiss authorities, diplomatic immunity for a bank. Why does a bank need immunity? No one answers. Because it's not a bank, Hoffman continues. It's a hub, the node where national monetary policies get harmonized, where central banks meet beyond the sight of parliaments and congresses, where the real decisions, the ones that shape the flow of credit across borders, get made. Kershaw returns to the table. So what do we call it? This thing we're describing? The system, Fontaine says simply. It doesn't need a more dramatic name. It is what it is, a system, self-regulating, self-reinforcing, and apparently designed to ensure that debt is never actually repaid, only refinanced, restructured, and redistributed. Hoffman picks up the Mexico document again. His hands are steady, but something in his eyes has changed. When I started this career, I believed I was studying national economies, competition between sovereign powers. Now I'm looking at this page, and I'm realizing we've been studying puppets. The strings were always somewhere else. The younger economists look shaken, the older ones look resigned, and somewhere in that gap between shock and acceptance, A new understanding is born. They will leave this room. They will write reports. Some will try to sound alarms. Others will quietly adapt their careers to the reality they've uncovered. A few will convince themselves they were wrong, that they saw patterns where none existed, that the world is simpler and more random than this. But deep down, they will know. The world doesn't owe money to countries. It owes money to the system, and the system never forgives debt. It only compounds it. Act 2. The hidden system begins, 1913 to 1944. To understand how 23 economists came to stare at a page of numbers in Basel and see the matrix, you have to go backward, not to 1982, not even to Bretton Woods. You have to go to 1913. Jekyll Island, Georgia. November. A private train car departs Hoboken Station in the dead of night, carrying 6 men. They use first names only. No secretaries, no records. The press will not know about this meeting for decades. The men are a senator, a treasury official, and representatives from the nation's most powerful banks. Their mission: draft legislation for a central bank that Americans will accept. Previous attempts failed because Americans, rightly, feared concentrated financial power. So this version will be designed to look decentralized. 12 regional banks, private ownership, a board in Washington that appears governmental but operates independently. The Federal Reserve Act passes Congress on December 23, 1913, when most members have left for Christmas. The significance isn't the conspiracy. The significance is the structure. For the first time, America's money supply would be managed not by markets or gold alone, but by a committee that could expand credit during booms and contract it during busts, a committee that could lend to banks that were too big to fail, a committee that, crucially, operated beyond direct congressional control. The Federal Reserve was sold as a stabilizer. What it actually created was a mechanism for coordinated credit creation. Within 5 years, World War I proved why this mattered. London, 1917. The British Treasury faces a crisis no one predicted. They're running out of money. Not gold, specifically. Money. The capacity to borrow. The Bank of England has extended credit to the limit. British banks are tapped out. The war consumes $7 million per day. Chancellor Bonar Law sends an encrypted cable to Washington. We need dollars. Immediately. The response comes through the newly operational Federal Reserve, not through Congress, not through a treaty. The Fed, using its new powers, creates a credit facility. Dollars flow to London. The mechanism is called a swap line, a temporary exchange of currencies between central banks. But it doesn't feel temporary. By 1918, Britain owes the United States Treasury $4.7 billion. France owes $3.4 billion. Italy, $1.6 billion. The debtors are allies, victors even. But they are debtors nonetheless. Here's what matters. The debts aren't restructured through diplomacy. They're restructured through the financial system, the same system that now includes the Fed as a senior partner. An architecture is forming, quietly, without grand announcements. Paris, 1919. The Treaty of Versailles imposes reparations on Germany, 132 billion gold marks, an impossible sum. The intent is punishment. The effect is systemic fragility. Germany can't pay, but the Allies need Germany to pay because they owe America. So a new entity is proposed, the Bank for International Settlements. Officially, it exists to manage reparation payments. Unofficially, it becomes something else. The BIS opens in Basel in 1930, and its charter contains a curious clause. It operates beyond the jurisdiction of Swiss law. Its staff enjoy diplomatic immunity. Its meetings are private. Its discussions are not recorded in public minutes. It is a bank for central banks, a place where monetary authorities can coordinate beyond the reach of elected governments. Within a year, the global financial system collapses anyway. September 21, 1931. London. The Bank of England, the institution that once financed the British Empire, abandons the gold standard. Panic spreads across Europe. Gold drains from central bank vaults in Paris, Berlin, Vienna. The Gouding exchange rate system that governed global trade disintegrates in weeks. Governments try everything: capital controls, trade barriers, competitive devaluations. Nothing works. Economies shrink. Unemployment explodes. But here's the strange part. Even as national economies collapse, the mechanisms of central bank cooperation persist. The BIS continues operating. Central banks continue coordinating. Swap lines remain open. Emergency measures are introduced that become permanent. Capital controls, managed exchange rates, central bank lending facilities that bypass normal credit markets. A pattern emerges. Crisis creates dependence. Dependence creates infrastructure. Infrastructure becomes permanent. By 1939, every major economy operates under some form of managed currency regime. Gold is still the nominal anchor, but in practice, central banks control the supply of money through administrative decision. Markets don't set interest rates anymore. Committees do, and those committees talk to each other, regularly, quietly. Act 3. Bretton Woods and the Golden Trap, 1944-1971, July 1944. Mount Washington Hotel, Bretton Woods, New Hampshire. 730 delegates from 44 nations gather in a resort built for robber barons. Outside, the war still rages. Inside, men in wool suits redraw the financial architecture of the planet. The official narrative: this is about preventing another depression, another world war. Create stable exchange rates. Establish international cooperation. Make trade predictable. The official mechanism: every currency will peg to the dollar. The dollar will peg to gold at $35 per ounce. Any country can theoretically exchange dollars for gold at that rate. This sounds like stability. What it actually creates is a pyramid. At the top, the United States, the only major economy with intact infrastructure and massive gold reserves. In the middle, the International Monetary Fund and World Bank, new institutions designed to provide emergency lending and development capital. At the bottom, every other country, now dependent on dollar liquidity to conduct international trade. John Maynard Keynes, the British representative, proposes an alternative: a truly neutral reserve currency called the Bancor, issued by an international clearing union. It would prevent any single nation from dominating the system. The proposal is defeated. Harry Dexter White, the U.S. Treasury official, ensures the dollar becomes the system's foundation. America has the votes. America has the gold. America has the only functional economy. The agreement is signed. Champagne is poured. Photographs are taken. No one says aloud what everyone understands. Sovereignty has just been traded for stability. The IMF begins operations in 1947. Its structure is revealing. Member nations contribute capital based on economic size. Those contributions determine voting power. The United States holds veto power over major decisions. But here's the subtle part. The IMF doesn't just lend money, it lends dollars. And to receive those dollars, countries must accept conditions. Initially, these are mild: promise to maintain exchange rate stability, promise to pursue sound monetary policy. Over time, the conditions multiply. By the 1950s, borrowing from the IMF means accepting structural adjustment, cut government spending, privatize state industries, open markets to foreign investment. The terms are presented as technical necessities, not political demands. Countries comply because they have no choice. International trade runs on dollars. To get dollars, you need exports or IMF loans. If you reject IMF conditions, you lose access to dollars. Without dollars, you can't import oil, machinery, medicine. The trap closes slowly, gently, like water filling a room. France. Charles de Gaulle stands before economists at the Élysée Palace and says something no one wants to hear. We are living under a system where America prints paper, and we give them goods. This is not trade. This is tribute. He orders the Banque de France to convert dollar reserves into gold. Physically, France sends warships to New York to collect gold bars from the Federal Reserve Vault. Other countries watch nervously. If everyone does this, the system collapses. There aren't enough gold bars. But everyone doesn't do this, because everyone is trapped. Britain needs dollars to import food. Germany needs dollars to import oil. Japan needs dollars to export cars. The rest of the world has spent 20 years building economies dependent on dollar liquidity. De Gaulle's protest is symbolic, powerful, but ultimately futile. The machine rolls on. By 1970, the math becomes impossible to hide. America has printed far more dollars than it has gold to back them. The Vietnam War, the Great Society, the space race, all financed by monetary expansion. Foreign central banks hold $80 billion in dollar reserves. Fort Knox holds $11 billion in gold, if even half of those dollars are presented for conversion. The system ends. Act 4. The Death of Gold, Birth of Infinite Debt, August 15, 1971. Sunday evening. President Nixon appears on television and announces that the United States will temporarily suspend the convertibility of dollars into gold. Temporarily. Economists watch in disbelief. A currency without an anchor? Unthinkable. Currencies need something real behind. Them, gold, silver, commodities. Otherwise, what stops governments from printing infinity? The answer, it turns out, nothing. And that's the point. The first few months are chaos. Exchange rates float wildly. The German mark surges. The British pound collapses. Central bankers convene emergency meetings in Basel, Washington, London. But something strange happens. The system doesn't collapse. It adapts. Without the gold constraint, central banks discover a new freedom. They can expand money supply to match economic growth. They can fight recessions with liquidity. They can coordinate to prevent banking crises. The dollar doesn't crash. Instead, it becomes more essential. Why? Because oil. The oil shock hits. Prices quadruple overnight. Every country needs dollars to buy oil. Not because of formal agreements initially, but because oil exporters, Saudi Arabia, Kuwait, Iran, choose to price in dollars and hold their surpluses in dollar-denominated assets. The U.S. Treasury, working quietly with Saudi Arabia, cements this arrangement. In exchange for military protection and weapons sales, the Saudis agree to price oil in dollars and recycle their surpluses into U.S. Treasury bonds. The petrodollar system is born. Now, every country needs dollars, not just for trade, but for energy. The demand for dollars becomes structural, permanent, unrelated to gold. The system has achieved something remarkable. It has made debt infinite. Without gold limiting money creation, and with global demand for dollars guaranteed by oil, the amount of debt that can be created is, theoretically, unlimited. Countries realize they can borrow more than ever before. Development projects, infrastructure, weapons, social programs, all financed by dollar-denominated debt issued by American commercial banks and backstopped by the Federal Reserve, IMF, and BIS. The borrowing spree of the 1970s begins. No one asks where it ends. ACT-FIV. The system tightens its grip. 1970s, 1980s. October 1979. Paul Volcker becomes chairman of the Federal Reserve. He is 6'7", chain smokes cheap cigars, and believes inflation is a moral disease. Within months, he raises interest rates to levels unseen in modern history. The prime rate hits 21.5%. Mortgages become impossible. Businesses collapse. Unemployment surges past 10%. But Volcker isn't concerned with domestic politics. He's concerned with the system. Inflation, if left unchecked, destroys the dollar's credibility as a reserve currency. And if the dollar loses credibility, the entire architecture collapses. So he breaks the back of inflation, deliberately, painfully. The domestic recession is brutal, but survivable. The international consequences are catastrophic. Mexico City, 1982. The finance minister reviews the debt portfolio. Every loan taken in the 1970s for oil refineries, steel mills, highways, public housing was denominated in dollars at low interest rates. Those rates are no longer low. The interest on Mexico's debt has tripled. Debt service now consumes 40% of the national budget. Oil revenues have collapsed. The peso is in free fall. On August 12, 1982, the finance minister places a phone call to the IMF. We cannot pay. Within hours, the news reaches every central bank in the world. Within days, economists realize Mexico isn't alone. Brazil, Argentina, the Philippines, Turkey, Poland, Zaire, Yugoslavia, every developing country that borrowed heavily in the 1970s now faces the same crisis. Dollar-denominated debt, multiplied interest rates, collapsed export revenues. The defaults should be random. Different countries, different governments, different economic models. Communist Poland shouldn't have the same creditors as capitalist Brazil, but they do. Economists begin compiling creditor lists. The pattern is undeniable. The same institutions appear again and again: the IMF, the World Bank, the BIS, syndicates of commercial banks operating under Basel frameworks, central bank emergency facilities. The debts all lead upward, to the same entities, the same system. The IMF's response is swift and uniform. Every debtor receives the same prescription: structural adjustment, cut government spending, eliminate subsidies, privatize state industries, devalue the currency, open markets to foreign investment, raise interest rates to fight inflation. The policies are presented as technical necessities, non-negotiable. If you want to reschedule your debt, and you must, because default means exclusion from global markets, you accept the terms. Country after country complies. Communist Poland accepts IMF conditions. Military-ruled Argentina accepts IMF conditions. Socialist Tanzania accepts IMF conditions. The ideology of the government doesn't matter. The sovereignty of the state doesn't matter. The will of the people doesn't matter. What matters is the debt, and the debt is owed to the system. Basel, 1982. Central bankers meet behind closed doors. The topic isn't how to help debtor nations. The topic is how to prevent contagion. If Mexico defaults completely, it could trigger a cascade. American commercial banks hold billions in Latin American debt. If those loans are written off, major U.S. banks become insolvent. The solution? Coordinated lending. The IMF provides emergency liquidity. The World Bank offers long-term restructuring. Commercial banks agree to roll over loans rather than demanding payment. The debtors are rescued, but they're rescued into permanent dependency. Whispers begin circulating in economic departments at Oxford, Harvard, the Sorbonne. Young economists reviewing the data notice the pattern. They write papers with careful titles: Institutional Coordination in Sovereign Debt Markets, The Homogeneity of IMF Conditional Lending. The older professors tell them to be careful. You're describing normal international cooperation, they say. Don't make it sound conspiratorial. But the young economists persist, because what they're seeing isn't cooperation between equals. It's hierarchy, subordination, a single system imposing uniform conditions on diverse nations. One paper, later retracted under mysterious circumstances, includes a chart mapping global debt flows. The chart looks like a pyramid. At the top, the Federal Reserve, the BIS, the IMF. In the middle, commercial banks and national central banks. At the bottom, sovereign borrowers. The flow of money is always the same direction, upward. The flow of debt is always the same direction, downward. And the cycle never ends. Act 6. The Mexico Moment, 1982. Collapse of the illusion, which brings us back to Basel, to that conference room, to 23 economists staring at a page of numbers. They've traced the debt. They've mapped the institutions. They've compared notes across continents. And they've reached a conclusion that makes them deeply uncomfortable. The world's financial system isn't a marketplace, it's a machine, a carefully constructed, self-reinforcing mechanism designed to ensure that debt is never eliminated, only transferred, restructured, and accumulated. Hoffman speaks again, voice heavy. What if this wasn't an accident? The room goes silent. What if Bretton Woods wasn't about stability? What if the IMF wasn't about emergency lending? What if the entire post-war financial architecture was designed deliberately to create permanent debtors? Wade objects immediately. That's insane. You're suggesting a conspiracy spanning decades. Not a conspiracy, Fontaine interrupts. A system. Systems don't require conspiracy. They require structure, incentives, and self-reinforcement. Look at what we've built. A reserve currency controlled by one nation. International institutions that lend in that currency. Conditions that ensure borrowers can never fully repay. Commercial banks that profit from the interest. Central banks that coordinate to prevent collapse. And a lender of last resort, the IMF, the Fed, the BIS, that ensures the system never actually ends. Kershaw adds, every debt crisis is resolved the same way. More lending, more conditions, more debt. The debtor never escapes. They just owe more to the same institutions on worse terms. Hoffman pulls out a calculator. Let's do the math. How much total sovereign debt exists right now? Someone provides a figure, approximately $4 trillion globally. How much of that is owed to private individuals, private businesses, actual bilateral country-to-country loans? They calculate. Less than 20%. The rest? Silence. The rest is owed to the system, to institutions that create money, that set interest rates, that determine the conditions of lending, institutions that cannot fail because they are the system itself. Marie Fontaine closes her eyes. When she opens them, her voice is quiet. My father was an economist. He worked on the Marshall Plan. He believed we were rebuilding the world into something better, more cooperative, more peaceful. She pauses. He didn't live to see this, and I'm grateful for that, because what we built wasn't cooperation. It was subordination. We created a global credit system that ensures every nation, every single nation, is a client, not a partner. The meeting continues for 3 more hours. They draft a report. It's technical, cautious, deliberately boring. It describes institutional coordination challenges and systemic debt interdependencies. It does not say, we have discovered that global finance is a control mechanism. It does not say, nations are not sovereign in any meaningful sense. It does not say, the system was designed to ensure permanent debt. But they know they will return to their home countries. They will brief their governments. Some will be told they're overreacting. Others will be told to keep quiet. A few will try to publish, only to find their papers rejected, their grants defunded, their reputations questioned. The system protects itself, not through violence, not through overt censorship, but through incentives, through career consequences, through the gentle pressure of institutional norms. You don't succeed in central banking by questioning central banks. You don't advance in the IMF by critiquing the IMF. You don't get tenure by arguing that the entire global financial system is a mechanism of control. So most stay quiet, and the machine rolls on. ICT 7. The realization. Countries don't owe each other, they owe it 1 year later. A private dinner in London. 5 of the economists from the Basel meeting have gathered at a club in Mayfair. No recording devices, no assistants. Over brandy and cigars, they speak freely. Hoffman. I've been reviewing League of Nations debt data from the 1920s. The patterns were already forming. Central bank cooperation through the BIS, coordinated lending to Germany, the same institutional structures we see now. Kershaw. So this has been running for 60 years? At least, probably longer. The Federal Reserve was created in 1913. That's when coordinated credit creation became possible at scale. Fontaine. But why? What's the purpose? If this is a system, what's it optimizing for? A long pause. Hoffman. Stability. The system optimizes for stability, not prosperity, not freedom, not national sovereignty. Stability, the prevention of chaos, the elimination of unpredictability. Kershaw. At what cost? At the cost of genuine independence. Think about it. No country can exit the system. If you refuse IMF loans, you lose access to international credit markets. If you reject dollar-denominated trade, you can't buy oil. If you try to create an alternative currency system, you're isolated, sanctioned, regime changed. Fontaine. So sovereignty is an illusion. Not entirely. Countries control their armies, their laws, their cultures, but finance, monetary policy, credit creation, those are controlled by the system, and the system has no nationality. The Fed isn't American, the BIS isn't Swiss, the IMF isn't global. They're something else, entities that exist above nations. Wade, who joined them reluctantly, speaks for the first time all evening. So what do we do? No one has an answer, because what can you do? The system is too large, too integrated, too essential. Collapse it, and you collapse global trade. Reform it, and you need the cooperation of the very institutions you're trying to reform. The trap is perfect. Act 8. The emotional collapse and the aftermath. In the years following 1982, a quiet shift occurs in economic thinking. Textbooks begin including new sections: international financial architecture, global monetary coordination, the role of multilateral institutions. The language is neutral. The implications are not. A generation of economists learns to describe the system without questioning it. They learn the mechanisms, swap lines, structural adjustment, Basel Accords, without asking who benefits or who controls. Some try to resist. Papers are written arguing for debt forgiveness, for alternative reserve currencies, for the democratization of the IMF. These papers are cited, debated, and ultimately ignored. Because the system doesn't change through academic papers. It changes through crisis. And the system has become very good at managing crisis without changing. Interviews years later reveal the emotional toll. Dr. Hoffman, retired. I spent 30 years studying monetary policy. I thought I understood it. Then I saw the Mexico files and I realized I'd been studying the surface. The real mechanism, the actual power structure, was invisible, hidden in plain sight. James Kershaw, memoir excerpt. The most disturbing part wasn't discovering the system. It was realizing how many people already knew and said nothing. Central bankers, treasury officials, senior economists, they knew, they'd always known, and they'd accepted it as natural, inevitable, the way things must be. Marie Fontaine, lecture notes. Students ask me, who's in charge? Who runs this system? And I don't know how to answer. There's no villain, no mastermind, just a structure that perpetuates itself, incentives that align, institutions that coordinate without explicit conspiracy. It's scarier than conspiracy, because you can't fight a structure. You can only exist within it. Act 9. Legacy. The machine rolls on the Mexican peso crisis. The IMF provides a $50 billion bailout. Conditions attached. The Asian financial crisis. Thailand, Indonesia, South Korea. The IMF provides emergency lending. Conditions attached. Argentina defaults. The IMF restructures. Conditions attached. The global financial crisis. The Federal Reserve creates trillions in liquidity. Swap lines to foreign central banks. The system rescues itself. Conditions attached. The European debt crisis. Greece, Ireland, Portugal. Emergency lending. Conditions attached. COVID-19. Every central bank expands money supply simultaneously. Coordinated. Instant. No. Debate. The pattern holds. Every crisis is resolved the same way. More liquidity, more debt, more coordination, more centralization. And every time, the economists who understand what's happening stay quiet. Because what else can they do? The machine is too big to fight. So they serve it. and tell themselves it's for the greater good. Act X. Final Reflection, Basel, 2025. A young economist attends her first BIS meeting. She sits in the same conference room where, 43 years earlier, her predecessors discovered the truth. She reviews debt profiles from the latest emerging market crisis. The numbers are different, the amounts larger, the countries newer, but the structure is identical. Same creditors, same terms, same upward flow of obligation. She wonders if she's seeing patterns that aren't there. She wonders if she's being paranoid. She wonders if her professors were right when they said the system is just efficient, natural, the way things must work. Then she remembers something one of them told her, late one night after too much wine. You'll have a moment. Every economist has it. When you realize we're not studying economies, we're studying a machine, and the machine is designed to run forever. Not for any nation, not for any ideology, just forever. She looks at the page of numbers. She sees the pyramid. She understands. And in that moment, she has to choose. Speak the truth and be marginalized, or stay quiet and advance. Most choose silence. She will too, probably, because the system doesn't just control money, it controls the people who understand money. And that might be the most elegant trap of all. Fade to black. Final title card. We thought nations ruled their economies. We were wrong. We were studying puppets. The strings were always somewhere else. Anonymous Central Banker, 1983 end.